Namaste. For some reason, when I initially looked at this reading, I chose the topic to be something about healing. And then I looked at it during the week and realized that didn't make any sense at all. So I don't know where my head was at, or maybe it was at somewhere really brilliant that I just can't access right now. But instead, it's really about, I think, what we sometimes call the letter of the law and the spirit behind the law, and what a law is, and what intent is, and what motivations are, and that whole sort of quagmire of stuff. And you probably never really hear this passage preached with gusto in those tithing churches, because you're going to have a hard time telling people they have to give you 10% when Jesus just said, it seems like, don't give anything, right? But what's really going on, if you think about it, is that we forget that Pharisees are church leaders. So the church leaders come to Jesus and try and use the rules of their religion to trap Jesus by getting him to say something about money that will tick off the political powers of the day and get him in trouble. So it's this really convoluted sort of circumstance. And if you reflect on it at first, and if you're anything like me, you kind of think, well, that doesn't have anything to do with my life. And until you start seeing people in social situations, right? And you start to realize that sometimes what we appear to be doing isn't what we're really doing. Sometimes what our motivation appears to be isn't really what our motivation is. It's one of the most fun things about going to a lot of weddings where your own family isn't present. Because you don't have a stake. And yet you can watch it going on from table to table. And it's kind of interesting because I have serious doubts about whether, I'm going to say this wrong. What I have serious doubts about is when we're not just forthcoming and straightforward, whether we ever arrive at where we were trying to get. In other words, it makes a lot more sense just to say, you know, I'm not going to sit with you because I just don't like you. And then, you know, go sit where you want to sit rather than try and come up with some acceptable excuse. And we spend a lot of our lives trying to make acceptable excuses. And we start to then construct rules, and we call them laws. And for something to be a law, I want to say it has to be true all the time, regardless of the circumstances. So the Jewish law was held to be true all the time. These are rules you followed all the time. You didn't deviate. Our visitor, before we started today, was explaining to Aaron and I that, or Aaron and me rather, that the law of attraction, you see, has limits. Because if you're a 4'1" midget, you can't think the right thought to get you to play in the NBA. And that reflects his scattered thought process a little bit too. But it does kind of show up that if you're claiming this as a law, then it has to work all the time, right? I mean, the law of gravity works all the time. Drop something, it hits the floor all the time. Otherwise, it would be the tendency of gravity. But we like our spirituality black and white. We like it to work all the time, or we like to pretend it works all the time so that we can just relax and let go of it. I had the opportunity to talk with a very nice man last night who had lost his daughter. She died less than a year ago of complications surrounding a medicine she had taken. And he was hearing all of these tried and true, wise rules about grieving, you know, and some of them were, if you're crying, you need to see a grief counselor.
What?
And I said, no, if you're crying, you're grieving. If you're not crying, you're probably a pretty good indication you should get to the grief counselor. And of course the old, it should take this long. You know, what are you grieving? And then, you know, you've got like a grief cookbook. You know, okay, your house plant died, that's 2 weeks, you know, and you could just see that he'd been kind of battered about by this combination of conventional wisdom and rules and laws and half-ass opinions. Which all kind of come under this general theme that I ciphered out of this, as Jethro used to do, of seeing clearly, right? Because seeing clearly is really a matter of dropping as much as is humanly possible all of that other stuff, all the rules, all the conventional wisdom, all the folk wisdom, all the, God forbid, I know this isn't PC, the old wives' tales, right? And the old husbands' tales, we can have those too. And just getting to direct experience as much as possible, which is sort of like ending up at that table with somebody at some social event and you don't want to be there with them. And just saying, well, we could dance around this all night, or I could just say, you know, I don't like it so much. And it seems really uncomfortable, because it would be really uncomfortable the first time. But would it be really uncomfortable the 20th time?
Or then nobody knows, everybody knows they can't sit by you if you show like that.
That's right. You get your own table. Nobody messes with you. Nobody takes your butter.
Or yours.
Don't get me started on my butter. I said to somebody Friday night, we were walking from one place to another in Lake Geneva, and there was a hole in this fence we could cut through because it's impossible to park in Lake Geneva. And I said, you know, look, here's a hole in the fence. We can go through here. I said, I got really used to looking for holes in fences all those years I spent in prison. And somebody said to me, you shouldn't tell people about that. You know, and then his wife hit him because he was dumb. But I think sometimes it's really useful to jolt people out of their expectations, their, what I want to call comfortable misperceptions, their social niceties, their little conventions, the things we use to keep others at a safe distance from ourselves. Now, I want to be clear, I don't mean the kind of boundaryless self-disclosure that a lot of people specialize in. I don't mean that if somebody comes up to you on the street and they're looking a little rough around the edges and it looks like they've got a gun in their pocket and says, how much money do you have in your purse? That you should say $463.27. You know, it's probably best to say, I don't have any. But there's other spaces and places where we really keep people at a distance who we would do well to let in a little closer. And we let people in too close who we would do well to keep at a distance. And I want to say it's because we don't let ourselves directly experience them. We experience their roles, we experience, you know, well, what is their relationship to us, where are we meeting them? And while there's some use to that, it seems like that was always the stuff they were trying to trap Jesus with. What does a nice Jewish boy say right now, right? What would a rabbi say right now? You know, what could I get you to say that wouldn't stand you in very good stead? And of course, one of the milder ways we do that is this whole idea of social, not just social convention, but what would the neighbors think, right? And these are all games and rules, and pretty soon we start living life kind of through a buffer. It's kind of like taking a little too much Benadryl, having maybe half a drink too many. And it just seems like the world is operating on a slight time delay. You know, so you're not quite, and when we do that, I want to say we miss out on what's really important. If I'm playing by all the nice little rules, or if I'm experiencing everybody by their role instead of experiencing them directly, or if I'm really spending a lot of time trying to make sure everybody else is comfortable without worrying about how I feel about the situation, I don't think I'm really living. In fact, I think that a lot of people use those rules to keep us in line. From when we're very young. Nice boys and girls don't do that. And then you get a little older, that's not the way we do things here. Right? Okay, so maybe I have to put up with that to keep my job. Maybe I have to do that in certain situations where it's absolutely imperative. But I think every time I can drop doing that, every time I can just experience people directly, I come one step closer to actually experiencing life, to actually maybe moving towards happiness. And if you look at it, most of the things we believe will make us happy are distractions. When the only thing that has a chance of making us happy on a lasting basis is dropping our distractions. You know, if only, it's the old thing, if only I had a nicer car. And then there's that, one of the insurance companies, I forget which one, where, you know, the guy comes out of his house and he falls down on his lawn crying, like scratching his way to his car because there's a little scratch on this side of his car. And the camera pulls back and the other side has just been sideswiped and taken out, because that new car was going to make him happy. And that new house is going to make him happy. And that new job is going to make him happy. And that new partner is going to make him happy. And we get those things and we're happy for a week. I think because we're social animals, we're designed to be in relationship. And the only way to be in authentic relationship is to drop the bullshit. Including the kind of bullshit that says I shouldn't say bullshit. Including the whole thing that says certain people aren't allowed to just be themselves. And yes, it'd be uncomfortable for a while. And yes, some people probably won't want to talk to us anymore. Is that a loss? I'm not so convinced. Because there'll be other people who will be able to handle us as we are. We may have to look a little harder, but we'll find them. And there's something just tremendously liberating about just being yourself. And maybe that's where life is really lived. Maybe our relationships fall apart because the pretend me is trying to relate to the pretend you, and neither one of us have any idea who the other one is. And the pretend me may not like the pretend you, but if the real me got to know the real you, we might get along just fine. That's the heart of Eastern traditions. You know, it's stripping away the pretend. And we forget that Jesus did not live in California. That Jesus lived a lot closer to what we now call the East than he lived to the West. And that he lived in a culture, he grew up in a trading center that would have brought people from the East and the West, and he would have been exposed to all of that. And while I don't think that he went to Tibet and learned Buddhism there 800 years before Buddhism arrived, I do think he was doubtless influenced by that. And so, the laws, some of them are great. I mean, it's a good idea to know that if you trip on that step out there, you may fall down the rest of them, so it's probably good to hold on to the handrail, right? But how many of them can we do away with and get along just fine? In fact, how many of them can we do away with and find ourselves and each other buried underneath?